I was driving through Kansas on my way home after visiting my parents. My father had recently come down with a bad case of the flu. I know what you're thinking. Who gets the flu in the middle of spring? But I guess he was overworking himself and caught a bug earlier this week. My mother told me it was nothing serious, but I had some vacation days saved up and I haven't seen my parents for quite some time. My parents live in St. Louis, while I had moved to Colorado for work and a girl. We have been talking for quite some time, and towards the end of last year, I moved down there to live with her. Driving through Kansas isn't bad. There isn't a whole lot to look at. I've done the drive quite a few times. Between moving my things and visiting my parents, I had gotten used to the trip. I don't mind the long drive. Yeah, some idiot drivers can be a pain, but I just like to put on an audiobook or some good music and enjoy the ride. Anyways, last week my mother called me and told me about my dad. I asked my girlfriend if she wanted to make the trip with me, but unfortunately she couldn't get any time off work whatsoever. I told her it was fine as I packed my bag and prepared for the trip. The drive out to my parents took me through Kansas City on Highway 70. It was all clear skies and sunshine the entire way. I made it there and spent the weekend with my parents. My father, who is probably the most stubborn man on the planet, was outside doing yard work when I arrived. We ended up not doing much the whole weekend. I fixed my mother's PC for the 12th time, and then my dad and I watched sports while he rested. Although it was uneventful, it was still a nice break from the monotony of my everyday life. Monday came around, and after saying my goodbyes, I was back on the road. About a third of the way through my trip, my GPS told me about a severe traffic accident on the main interstate. I sighed as I glanced down at the little map. A large chunk of the highway was completely red, and my GPS mentioned an increased arrival time of 4 hours. It then asked me if I'd like to reroute, and I accepted. The new trip would redirect me through Highway 50 instead of the interstate. It was a bit out of the way, but the arrival time would only be increased by 30 minutes or so. Once I managed to navigate my way onto Highway 50, I noticed quite a few other cars had the same idea. The road was mildly congested, but after around 20 minutes of driving, it began to clear up. This struck me as odd as there hadn't been any turnoffs for the cars to get off the highway, yet slowly but surely the traffic was dissipating. After an hour of driving on this road, I glanced out of my window and I could see a tall wooden cross in the middle of a field. Attached to the cross was a scarecrow. I chuckled to myself as I had never seen a real scarecrow outside of Halloween decorations before. Around a minute or two later, I passed by a highway marker that had a large number 50 on it. I watched the scarecrow fade into my rear view, and I continued driving. Another hour passed by and I glanced over to the right once again. There was another scarecrow fastened to a large wooden cross in the middle of a field. I looked at it closely. It seemed almost identical to the one I had previously seen. Whoever owned these fields must have a serious bird problem, I thought. Then, a minute or two later, I saw that same highway marker on the side of the road. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief. This was the most intense deja vu I had ever experienced. I shook it off and drove a little bit faster. Another hour and the same sight appeared on the horizon. I stared wide-eyed as I approached it. This wasn't just a random case of deja vu anymore. There was something obviously wrong. As I drove by, I couldn't be certain, but it looked like the scarecrow was closer to the road. I sped past it quickly, and the sign as well. I was growing more and more concerned. While I drove, I grabbed my phone and called my girlfriend. Though whenever I would try to call, I would just get a busy tone. I had full bars, but it was like something was blocking my calls. I tried the police next, but the result was the same. After my failed attempts to contact anyone, I could already see it growing in the distance. The Scarecrow. It was much closer to the road this time. I checked my mirrors to make sure there were no other cars around me, even though there hadn't been for a few hours now. I pulled my car into the far left lane and continued driving. I could see the Scarecrow much more clearly as I drove by. Its face was a patchwork mess of cloth and leather. It had some type of cowl wrapped around its head. Its clothing was tattered and looked like it was wearing a cloak of some kind that swayed silently in the wind. As I passed by it, I could have sworn it lifted its head to look at me. I floored the gas pedal and flew by it. I was freaking out by this point, and to only make matters worse, the sun was on a collision course with the horizon. By the time I saw the Scarecrow again, the sun had vanished and was replaced by the distant stars. I thought it was weird that time outside was still going on, yet I was stuck in this loop. I noticed that my fuel gauge hadn't changed at all since I got on this road either. The wooden cross was rapidly approaching as I maintained my speed, but something was different about it this time. The Scarecrow was missing. I scanned around the edges of the road for it, but the lack of light made it difficult to see. I was on edge. I was borderline panicking. I had been driving on the same road for hours and hours with no end in sight. I passed by the highway marker yet again, and still there was no sign of the Scarecrow. I considered stopping, but quickly pushed that thought out of my head. After the thought left my mind, I was mentally preparing myself for yet another trip past the Scarecrow. Then I saw it. The wooden cross. It was no longer on the side of the road, but it was now standing directly in the center of it. I slowed my car down to a crawl as I approached. I wanted to blow right past it, but I didn't want to risk an accident. As I got closer, my car began to make strange noises. Something under the hood was banging together. It sounded like a bucket being thrown against a wall. My car died right in front of the looming wooden cross, yet there was still no sign of the Scarecrow. I looked around and double-checked that my doors were locked. Then I heard something ominous. There was a tapping on the roof of my car. I could feel a bead of sweat run down from my temple as I white-knuckled my steering wheel. A shadow out of the corner of my eye drew my attention. Fingers crawling down my window appeared from above. I leaned away from my window as much as I could. The clothed face slowly started to appear on the other side of the glass. Fog spread across my window every time that it breathed. It then began tapping on the glass. I wasn't sure what to do. I was basically trapped within my own car. It began to drag its sharp nails along the glass. The screech they made bored a hole into my eardrums. I attempted to restart my car, but it just made an endless squeal. Then, the Scarecrow reared back its arm and slammed it into my window. I could hear the glass creak underneath the force. It pulled back again, and the second time the window began to fracture. I was starting to hyperventilate. I wanted to believe this wasn't really happening. I was a nobody. Nothing weird or strange ever happens to me. Its hand shattered through the glass. Tiny shards sprayed all around me. But before I could even process that, its hand grabbed me by my shirt and tried to pull me out of the car. I fought against it as hard as I could, but its grasp didn't let up. It dragged me halfway out of my car. I reached for my keys one last time. I knew it was hopeless, but I didn't have much else. I twisted the key and my car roared to life. I hit the gas with my toes and my car squealed past the wooden cross. There was a light thud on my roof as the Scarecrow's grip loosened and I pulled myself back into my car. As I passed by the highway marker, the sun began to rise. Around 15 minutes later, I found myself pulling into a town. This was the first new thing I had experienced since driving on this road. I quickly pulled into a gas station and called my girlfriend. When I did, she sounded frantic, asking where I was. I told her that I got held up and that I was on my way. She said she was about to send out a search party. I managed to laugh even though my hands were still shaking. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I made it home safely, and aside from a mild case of PTSD, I was fine. I don't know where that scarecrow came from or why it targeted me, but I think I'm pretty lucky to be alive. Don't take Highway 50 if you can avoid it. I don't want any of you to end up in a similar situation. Or worse.